Welcome, you guys, to Templations, where we study the path of illness and we walk the path of wellness. Even though I'm wearing these sacred colors and I'm acting as a teacher today, I am just a student who has learned from my own path of addiction with porn addiction, and it has led me to rediscover our common lineages of ancient wisdom traditions and how they connect with cognitive science to give us clear tools and protocols and attitudes and mindsets to be able to deal with our addictions and walk a path of wellness. Today, we'll learn a little bit about the Epicureans and join them in their garden with a savoring meditative practice. We'll learn about the ancient currency of life known as dopamine and how it's important in our daily lives and experience of pleasures and drive. And then we'll move on to the Stoics. Learn of their tough mindset and join them in a Stoic writing practice. So that's why I asked you to bring your journals. And then we'll connect it all together with the key insights of the ancients and how it's relevant to dealing with addiction and just the mindset of dealing with life in general. So please, if you have questions, write them down and come send them to me at the end. I'll have some time for that. And I thank you for your time and for your attention. I want to start off by defining what is addiction. There's a lot of different frames that you can look at addiction, whether that's the trauma frame, the socioeconomic frame, the chemical addiction frame. But one thing is common, and that is that addiction is the progressive narrowing of what you can enjoy. I repeat, addiction is the progressive narrowing of what you can enjoy. Now this is why not everything that we're dependent on is addictive. We don't say that oxygen is addictive, even though that we are all dependent on it every moment of our lives. As we continue to inhale oxygen, it does not narrow what we can enjoy, it only greatly expands it. And so any behavior, any substance can be a source of the path and the process of addiction in our lives. In other words, the same process that goes on in someone who's engorged in meth on the street is the same exact process that we undertake when we're mindlessly scrolling Instagram or YouTube or watching porn. It's not like our brains have 20 different pathways for 20 different substances or behaviors. It's all the same process. And you might be wondering, well, why does this process exist? If it's so detrimental and so destructive, why do we still have this addictive thing, through the process of, this long being life on Earth? Well, in another circumstance, in another pre-industrial society where we're looking to our environments to meet our needs, then the process of addiction, the addict brain is actually, it goes by a different name, and that's the foraging brain. Because the process of falling in love with a substance or behavior is the same pathways that motivate us to fall in love with foraging for food and nourishment and warmth and innovation, as well as for social connection and partners. The issue is, in this world where we do not look to reality in our environments to meet our needs, reality is seen as boring and gray and dull and something to be escaped. And so that process of that motivation and falling in love with an act that brings us closer into connection with reality is turned towards the escape from it. So you might, I hope that kind of makes it clear what I'm talking about when I mean addiction. It's this process that we all fall into at any time with a substance or any behavior. It has to do with compulsive, mindless consumption, and it's a real doozy. So now I want to talk about the Epicureans and the Stoics. But first, some background. About 2,500 years ago, this guy named Socrates lived in Athens. Socrates was seen as a man of great integrity and absurdity and commitment to conversation and questioning. His process involved always assuming ignorance, and out of questioning out of ignorance, he would get other people to realize that they were making assumptions that they had not known, that they too were ignorant. And because of this process of questioning and reasoning further into reality, he ended up pissing off a lot of people, and he was sentenced to death in a trial that lasted 1 day under 3 charges: corruption of the youth, going against the state religion, and worshiping gods other than the normal gods, basically, even though he believed in the gods. Now he had a very, very important student, and this student goes by the name of Plato. Now Plato was this is one of the main sources that we get about Socrates, because Plato loved his teacher so much he would write his dialogues down. And when he died, he was absolutely tormented because the city that he loved the most had sentenced the man he loved the most to death. Now, Plato continued the process of educating the youth by establishing the school called the Academy, and it was known as the first higher education establishment in the Western civilizations, where they studied wrestling and gymnastics alongside mathematics and philosophy and ethics. Now, Plato had a very important student. He had many students, but one of the notable ones goes by the name of Aristotle. Aristotle was a giant in philosophy, but also just a whole array of subjects. He wrote books on everything, on ethics, on maths, on how to write books. So he continued that lineage of educating the youth, but he was not so blessed with a student that would continue that education. He had a student going by the name of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great went on to become the leader and the emperor of the Macedonian Empire, and would soon, through his conquest, conquer most of the known world, stretching from ancient Greece to India. Now, he did not name an heir when he died, and so upon his death, his generals split up his empire and fought over the lands. And of course, the people greatly suffered. People were misplaced from their homes, displaced from their culture. Their ties to community and to land and to the network of kinship and gift giving was completely broken. And this loss of home, this alienation, culminated in what would become an age of anxiety. And out of that age of anxiety arose the philosophies of the Epicureans, from Epicurus of Samos and of Zeno of Chrysippus, which is the founder of Stoicism. And this is why these two are so particularly relevant for us now, and why we can gain some wisdom from them, is because they were taking what they could from their lineage of wisdom traditions and repurposing them to fit the ailments of their times in this age of anxiety. So I'm trying to do the same. Now the Epicureans, they lived in, well, they practiced their philosophy in this place called the Garden. Their leader basically bought this garden, and they were able to live a kind of minimalist aesthetic lifestyle where they would not really deal with the politics of Athens and just kind of the civilized, world that they were in, basically. They saw the universe and the cosmos as made of void and atoms, which greatly went against the common culture. And in this universe of atoms, they noticed that everything goes towards pleasure and away from pain. And because of this, they saw pleasure as an inherent good and pain as an inherent bad. And you might think that from that understanding, they would go on to pursue this extreme hedonistic lifestyle. of just constant, indulgence in pleasures, but it was quite the opposite. Because they valued pleasure so much, they realized that they must moderate their pleasures and their pains, because the constant chasing of pleasure for its own sake would lead to greater pains in the long run. And so their ultimate goals were to attain a state of tranquility, of ataraxia, through the devotion to philosophical friendships and to pursuing pleasures that were ultimately natural and necessary. Now this Epicurean calculation, what is natural and what is necessary, was the foundation for their quote-unquote minimalist lifestyle. Now, I want to define what natural and necessary mean, because those terms kind of can mean different things. To them, what is natural is that which supports our life as physical beings, as mental beings, and as social beings. So that could be food, that could be nourishment and shelter, but that could also be good conversation. That could be affection. That could be looking into the eyes of each other and savoring each other's presence. Now, what is necessary is what meets those natural needs the best way, the most robust way, the most simple way. So if you were to run this calculation through Coca-Cola, for example, or like a soda, and you say, well, is it natural? Yes, it's a natural desire. It goes towards my body, but is it necessary? Is it the best robust way to meet the needs? And that, you could say, well, water would meet it better, or something else. So this is a very simple calculation, and you might realize that if you were to run this through everything that we pursue, a lot of things fall out of the range of natural and necessary. So I'm not saying that we must get rid of absolutely everything that is unnatural and unnecessary, but it is more about the utmost prioritization of these things. One of their key insights was that what is natural and what is necessary is the easiest things to obtain. And so if you focus on these things, these desires are actually easily satisfiable. And from this level of ease and tranquility, we can continue to pursue relationships in which we are making each other more virtuous and more reasonable and more social. So now let's go into the neuroscience of dopamine. Dopamine, I called it this ancient currency of life because it is a molecule, a currency of motivation that exists in all animals, from us to the birds to the worms that are underneath the soil. Everything that is experiencing a drive to live and to continue foraging for food, for level of temperature, for whatever its needs are, that drive is motivated by this molecule dopamine. And in us, dopamine is vital for motivation, for the feeling of excitement and mood, for craving itself, for intentional movement, and for concentration. It's the general baseline for the sense of lust for life and luster in life. So a lot of people have heard of dopamine hits. This idea that every time we get something or chase something that we get a hit of dopamine. And that's not entirely accurate. What's actually happening is that there's a constant circulating baseline of dopamine running through our brain and body all the time. You could imagine this like in a village economy. Let's say they use like cowrie shells as a sort of currency. The level at which this currency is circulating among the village is a level at which dopamine is circulating through your brain and body. And at this baseline circulating level, there is times where we get huge dumpings of dopamine. It's like a peak if you're going to look at it like a graph. And this is when we are in pursuit of something desirable, and it's when we achieve something desirable. And to tie it to the village metaphor, this would be like, imagine the currencies and the cowrie shells that they use for currency are made and produced from these ponds that the village like fishes from. Imagine if a helicopter scooped up all those shells and dumped it across the whole village. and the villagers were all excited and they threw a festival. That's what we are experiencing. That's what our neurons, the cells in our brain is experiencing when we have a peak in dopamine. It's excitatory, it's motivating. And that's why pleasure is so great. But that's also why the chronic, repeated dumping of dopamine through the pursuit of pleasures ultimately undermines our ability to feel pleasure. Because if you imagine 10 helicopters that are scooping shells one after the other from this pond of available resources, dumping it on the village, day after day, you're depleting the available amount of this currency, of this essential nutrient of life. And because of this, the villagers or the brain cells down-regulate. They stop trading so much. They dampen the amount of excitement that they're giving to each other, so as to let the pond rejuvenate more. And this experience of deficiency, we experience as a kind of discomfort, a kind of dull pain. And when we try to meet that pain by the pursuit of more peaks of dopamine, then we are further depleting our so-called stock of dopamine. Now, if you want to visualize it like a graph, what that means is that every time that there's a peak of pleasure, there's an equal and opposite amount of dip below baseline before it goes back to the natural baseline. So as it goes down, and let's say you're watching a YouTube video, and then it ends, and then it goes down, and that feeling of it's kind of like dull, it's kind of uncomfortable, and so you click on another one before your dopamine has given time to get back to baseline. So it goes to the same peak from there, but because it's lower, it does not reach the same height as the previous peak. And you do it again and again, and you keep scrolling, and each time the peaks and the valleys are getting lower and lower. Your peaks of pleasure are continually getting less and less, and your baseline is continually getting less and less. And because our pools become so depleted, we cannot experience the beauty in the simple pleasures anymore. The redness of a strawberry and the sweetness in its flesh. And this is really the insidious process of addiction. It's the further narrowing of our baseline of dopamine. So another way to visualize this is to take this kind of vertical graph and flip it on its side. What you have is a scale. And you can imagine that, this is kind of like pain and pleasure. They're co-located. It's the same pathways in the brain. And as we keep putting stuff on the side of pleasure, because our bodies need equilibrium, it has to balance out. And the equal amount of pleasure that we tip, the equal amount of sort of discomfort on the other side. And this is what people experience in postpartum depression. After this huge dump of dopamine, having this baby, there's a huge crash afterwards. It's the same thing after a huge marathon, and probably for me after the speech I'll have a crash. This sort of inevitable come down from everything. And so understanding the system really enables us to kind of respect the come down, to not try to see the discomfort as bad in itself, but as an inevitable part of pursuing the pleasure that we want to partake in. Now I hope also I just want to add on to the scale image that when we overload it so much, sometimes the hinge gets kind of sticky because of how much it's been strained on the other side. When it snaps over, that pain side needs a lot of time to rejuvenate. And so the experience of being addicted, the experience of being depressed, this is kind of that stuck hinge, and it's not like it'll be stuck forever, but it does mean that it'll take some time. So I hope this makes it clear that we need to protect our dopamine baseline. For the dopamine baseline is our just experience of pleasure in life, our experience of motivation for living. And if not, it will lower and lower until we cannot enjoy anything at all. So I want to tie back the Epicureans and just kind of appreciate, it's not the Epicureans aren't the only people who realize this, but you know, the neuroscience makes it clear that this is the mechanism underneath this pain-pleasure balance. I want to guide you guys in a savoring practice that I get from the Epicureans, and taking in with some meditation from the Buddhists. We will sit, I'll invite you to close your eyes, listen to your inner balance, tip forward and back until you feel off balance, lessening each time until you find your center in that plane, and then side to side, and then your head, and then your neck, and then we'll savor the center, and then I'll ask you to root, in which we'll drip our awareness down the front side of our body, the back side of our body, the center, we'll savor that, and then we'll turn our senses and see how they're fitted to our environment, and then we'll savor being here with each other. So if you please, get a comfortable seat, close your eyes, listen to your inner balance, rock forward and back until you find your center. If you found that, then you can go side to side. If you found that, you can do the head forward and back. And if you found that, you can do the head side to side. You can keep calibrating if you need to, but if you found your center, savor it. Really paint out your experience as a felt sense memory that we can come back to later. This is our center. Now if we can drip our awareness starting at the top of the head down the front face of the body. And if you cannot feel a part of your body, you can just hover there for a little bit until you feel something, the faintest sensation. Scanning down the front face, into the ground, into your gravity. Now scanning down the back face of your body. And if you've done that, scanning down the center of your body, the inner world, scanning that, what does it feel like? And then root your awareness about 2 feet into the ground below you. If you found your root, just savor it. I want you to notice the sounds, the experience of being able to hear. I want you to notice the feeling of your seat on the whatever you're sitting on, that contact. feeling of your hands and your feet. Savor that. And the experience of the taste in your mouth. Notice the smells with each inhale. And if you want to slowly open your eyes and bring this consciousness, this cognition into the space around us, notice what it's like to see. Notice how in each of the senses we are intimately tied to our environment. And notice what it's like to be with all these beautiful people here. Now, as we end this practice, bring whatever you gained into your everyday cognition and consciousness. Thank you. This is the brain. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll explain what's going on here. So I want to talk about the actual pathways in the brain and really make sense of all the stuff that I talked about before in our experience and tie it to biology. So there are 4 pathways I want to talk about today. 2 of them are usually linked together because they come from the same cluster of cells that produce the dopamine. So you kind of think of those clusters of cells like the fishermen, villagers that take the shells from the ponds. The first one goes from this place called the ventral tegmentum. The ventral tegmentum means front floor, and that's this spot, this little cluster of cells at the front floor of the brain. And it goes up and forward to this spot called the nucleus accumbens, which is the reward center of our brain. And this pathway is how we experience motivation and pleasure and drive. Now, from this same spot, the ventral tegmentum, it also goes up and forward to the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for perception, cognition, concentration, as well as decision making based on those perceptions. Now, these 2 pathways are so intimately linked, and it gets greatly affected by addiction, especially the highly dopaminergic substances of cocaine and methamphetamine. This is why our perception is so greatly pulled towards things that are highly salient and highly desirable. The pathway of reward is intimately linked with the pathway of perception and of decision making. Now there's another pathway. This is the substantia nigra. Nigra meaning dark. It's a dark cluster of cells. And it goes up to what's called the dorsal striatum, which is this movement center of the brain. And this gets particularly affected in Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. Because this pathway is responsible for deliberate slow movement, or just fast movement, just deliberate movement, people with these diseases experience shaking, difficulty speaking, difficulty initiating movement. And what actually is happening in those diseases is a death of the cells that are producing dopamine. And it's obviously clear now why those people obviously experience great levels of depression and of crippling inability to be motivated. There's another pathway, and this one is not talked about that much. It's this little one here that goes downwards from the hypothalamus to the pituitary. You might be wondering, what is dopamine doing in the pituitary gland? And what it is doing is inhibiting the production of prolactin. The pituitary gland will continue to produce prolactin if it is not told by dopamine, hey, you don't need to produce that right now. And prolactin is what causes breast development and lactation in pregnant women. And at too high of levels, it is what causes infertility, vaginal dryness, erectile dysfunction, gynecomastia in men, which is male breast development. And the reason why it does this is because prolactin inhibits the production of luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone is what stimulates the production of testosterone and estrogen and growth hormone and these anabolic hormones in the testes and the ovaries. So just to keep it short, a lower dopamine baseline means more prolactin, which means less testosterone and estrogen and all of these anabolic hormones that are necessary and vital for the production of tissues, of muscle, and of ligaments and brain tissue. So this is just juiciness. Like, more dopamine baseline is more juiciness, and less dopamine baseline is less juiciness. And this is why the continual narrowing of the dopamine baseline equals less juiciness. And this is also, in my own experience, kind of has made sense as I've been able to continually take out the behaviors and substances that I've been addicted to. Just noticing, like, I mentioned the redness of strawberries and the sweetness of their flesh. There's a certain depth to experience that can be reactivated when we raise our baseline by not pursuing this constant escape from discomfort. And that's what I want to touch on next, is that people, chasing addictions are not doing it because they just want pleasure. We are doing it because we are escaping discomfort. And this is obviously uncomfortable to deal with, but that's where I turn to the wisdom of the Stoics to help us deal with the discomfort and to help us gain the inner strength to be able to walk the path of sensible, honorable living. So the Stoic word comes from the word stoa, and that was this painted porch or portico that was in the agora, which is the marketplace in Athens. So unlike the Epicureans, who were kind of detached from the city, kind of distanced from the life of the city, the Stoics were intimately involved, and their members included escaped slaves all the way to the great emperor Marcus Aurelius. So I find their philosophy very useful for dealing with our, hectic modern lives. They saw the cosmos, in contrast to the Epicureans, as one body, as one organism in which we are a part. And because this one cosmos, this one being that we co-create is divine, we each share a little divinity in our own being. The goal of all the philosophies, but especially Stoicism, is that of eudaimonia, which, if you were to translate literally, eu means well, daimon means inner divinity. It's your inner spirit doing well, is this state of deep flourishing. And the way that the Stoics saw to deep flourishing was that of cultivating virtue. Virtue comes from the Greek word arete, which means quality of excellence. So just as sharpness is the virtue of a knife, patience and listening and strength are virtues of a human. So what makes humans excellent? Historically, going back to the lineage of Aristotle, it was kind of made clear that those virtues which make us more social and more reasonable are those which lead to more flourishing. And the way that the Stoics wanted to cultivate these virtues was in this three-pronged response. And I'll touch on those three responses through one of their metaphors. One of the metaphors they used was that of the good archer. They said, the good archer is not good or excellent because they hit the target every single time perfectly. They're an excellent archer because they take the utmost care to every single shot of the process before they release that arrow. From the picking up the arrow, to the knocking it on the string, to the drawing back, to the release. Every aspect of what they have control over is attended to with care and with virtue. And because they attend to every part they can control with virtue, when they release that arrow, they do not care what fate does with that arrow. A bird could come and intercept it, a sudden gust of wind could come and blow it off course. But the good archer knows that they did everything they could do right. And so, for them, what was in our control was that of our attitude and our action. And if we could just care about doing our attitude and our action with the best excellence, and if we made that our desire, then we can fulfill that desire at any time, because we have control over our mindset, our attitude, and our action. The way that they saw to disciplining and training ourselves to have this excellence was to discipline your perception, your action, and your will. What that means in practice is to correct our perceptions, well, first being mindful of our own perceptions, and then correcting them as they come up to be more true. So perhaps instead of saying, oh man, I'm stuck in traffic, you would correct your perception to say, I'm in my car with a bunch of other people in their car. We are going slower than we were before, and I may arrive at a certain time that I was not expecting to, but I can let the people know. So the shift of training our perception to be more in tune with reality, the deeply kind of Buddhist but also Stoic practice, that's how we discipline our perception. Then that of action, to have a constant vigilance to make our actions benefit the good of the organism in which we are a part of, to benefit each other as well as ourselves. And that's kind of simple. Then there's that of will, and that's about desire. And for them, the constant vigilance to approach desire was that of making sure that you just want to do what is within your responsibility to the best that you can, and to take that which is outside of our responsibility, the fate and the destiny and the challenges that nature puts in our path, as opportunities for growth. Because they saw the universe as an organism, we could be like the feet. And when the organism steps on the feet and gets mud on the feet, it would not be wise for the foot to be angry and say, "Why are you doing this to me?" Because the process of the strain that the body puts on the foot is a call to further strengthening for the good of the body. And this means that they had this metaphor, it's that of fire, that we can become like a fire that turns obstacles into fuel. And really this mindset turns challenges from something that should be avoided into a gift, into an opportunity to practice more virtue in our attitude and our action. This is actually studied now by cognitive science through mindsets, where they measure essentially the different vital signs associated with stress or performance, and see how that aligns with different mindsets. The mindset I want to talk about is the stress as strengthening mindset, as opposed to the stress is debilitating mindset. We've all heard the whole notion that stress is really bad for us, and it doesn't feel good. And I want to define stress as challenge in your goal-related efforts. Adversity in your goal-related efforts. So when you look at the literature, it's actually clear that as much information there is that stress is debilitating, there's also as much information to show that stress is enhancing, that it's almost like a superpower, that it increases concentration, increases information processing, increases even amongst those who have been through great trauma and have made it as an opportunity to strengthen and have found a way out, that it increases connection with themselves, with their values, and with others. So if there's evidence for both, that stress can be debilitating and can be strengthening, the question is which one is more useful? And the stress and strengthening mindset is clearly more useful. They did this study during the 2008 financial crisis. They studied these people who were, the company was going down, they were laying off a bunch of people. They showed some people videos providing the evidence for that stress is debilitating, and other people the evidence that stress is strengthening. What was found is that the people with the stress is strengthening had less backaches, less muscle tension, less insomnia, less just illness across the board. They reported greater performance at work and better happiness. Another population that this is studied in is Navy SEALs, in which the Navy SEALs trainees have to go through this rigorous, stressful training called the BUDS training, where they're sleep deprived, they're forced to do crazy workouts at 2 a.m. in the cold water, and only 15% of the people make it through. All of the people who make it through have the stress and strengthening mindset, and those who rate higher in this mindset are better liked by their peers and show faster performance in their obstacle times. So it's really crazy how just the way that we frame something can have such a great impact on our bodies and our physiology. So the key shift is to see that stress is not something that we have to cope with, but something that we can leverage. There's a sort of 3-step approach that these mindset trainers use, and that's 1, to acknowledge and be mindful of the stress when it happens. 2, to welcome it. And how do you welcome stress? Well, it's to realize that stress means that you care about something. Because you don't stress about things that you don't care about. You don't stress about a worm that's being eaten across the world by a bird because you're not the worm, you're not the worm's mother. But if you can realize that what you stress about is what is pointing to something that you care about, you can use stress as an opportunity to reconnect with your values and reconnect to that which you care about. And if you are realizing that what you're caring about is actually something that you don't want to keep pursuing, then it's a good opportunity to reevaluate what your values are and shift. But if it's something that is inherently important to you, then we can see that being stressed out about it is actually a beautiful part of being able to care about it. And from there, accepting and welcoming this inevitable part of caring about things, we can utilize the stress response as a superpower to achieve what we care about, to allow the discomfort and the focus and the drive that comes from stress to drive further and to achieve it better. So now I want to just tie things together with ancient insights and how they connect to the path of recovery. And this is kind of the things that I've noticed from all these different wisdom traditions and very important mindset shifts for me on my journey. 2 of these insights are that everything is interconnected and that everything is impermanent. We can kind of, if you just logically think about it, it's pretty clear that everything is interconnected, that we're constantly eating and pooping and breathing, and that it's coming from everything else. But it also means that things that are seen as opposites and polarities need to exist together, such as pain and pleasure, stress and care, light and dark, heat and cold, etc. And also that everything is impermanent, that everything is not only constantly dying, but will die. And what that means partially is that everything exists because it is fed by what it is consuming. So the way that you are now, whatever addiction or way that you can see the world, whatever that lens or frame is existing because you have been feeding it that way. And in the way that you have created that, so too you can create something else, that you can become different, and that it will happen if you so choose to mindfully consume. In other words, this slope that we have deeply carved into the mountain is deeply carved in, but there's also other slopes that we can go down. And sometimes we just need to look outside of ourselves, to have others give a big hand to pick us up and put us on another path. And this is the practice, what I'm alluding to is what we'll do at the end, and that's the writing practice. But the next shift that was really powerful to me has to do with the shift in the deep existential mode. And to me, this looks like the shift from the geocentric worldview to the heliocentric worldview, from the having mode to the being mode. And I'll say what these terms mean. You know, if you remember, for a good while in Europe's history, they thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. And then they were sending merchant ships out and they were sinking, and people were dying because when they look up at the night sky, things wouldn't make sense. The planets were doing crazy things. And it wasn't until this guy, Nicholas Copernicus, you know, at that time, realized that the math is better when actually the sun is the center that we are circulating around, that everything made sense. And because of that, they were able to navigate better. And I see that as a deep existential mode in which we, or I, am not the center of the universe, but that I am a center in a world of other centers, and that there are bigger centers that are more real that we can tap into for power, for strength, for an opportunity to be different. What this also means is that this is the term coined by, I believe, Erich Fromm. It's the having mode versus the being mode. But I like the term becoming mode. The having mode is what we enter into when we see things to obtain, to have, for power, for dexterity, for skill. And this works really well for things like tools and shelter and food. But it doesn't work so great with relationships. And that can be relationships, like with people, or even with the land that you live on. Where in the having mode, everything is seen as, how is it relevant to me and my power and my ability? Whereas the being mode, or the becoming mode, is how can we correlate together? How can we unfold together to become that which is greater than we were before? And the needs that you are meeting are inherently different. You know, there's, in the having mode, things like hunger and temperature, once you've met that need, it kind of has an end. You can't just always be hungry. You can't always be thirsty. You can't always be cold after you've put on, enough layers. But there's never a point in which we are not developmentally, like, you're never too patient or too wise or too any other virtue, I guess. And so this is kind of the mode that I see in Stoicism and Epicureanism and as Buddhism, is like learning to balance these two things, learning to focus on meeting that being or becoming mode need by continually unfolding in more virtue. And for me, this comes to a question of, instead of how is everything relevant to me, how can I find the thing that'll take me out of my addiction to what needs to be done? And it kind of alludes back to the what is natural and what is necessary. But the simple question, what needs to be done? For me, it can apply to little things of, just doing the dishes, or to the greater things of caring for each other and giving affection. But it also means that one action step of doing what needs to be done can ultimately lead to another step and another step and another step. And if you do it one day at a time, one moment at a time, you can have a couple of good minutes, and then a good day, and then a good week, and then a good month, and then a couple good years. So this whole approach of the past that I've tried of just like, I'm just gonna hit this streak of 40 days, and I just care so much about the number. I think it's just because of the way that our brains are developed with the sun, that we really, if we take it one step at a time, one day at a time, one moment at a time, then we can really unfold into greater things. So now the practice. Marcus Aurelius is a man who I get this practice from. This is before I learned about all this kind of stuff. I was just reading essentially kind of like his journal. It's called the Meditations, where he would write to himself at night and just remind himself of these maxims, these concise sayings of wisdom. And as he would write to himself as a friend, he would address his own issues with these words of wisdom. So for example, I'm paraphrasing here, he would say, when you get up in the morning and you're comfy in the sheets and you want to stay in, tell yourself, I am not here on this earth just to feel nice. Look to your brethren and your sisters, the birds and the flowers that rise in the morning and do their task for the good of the ecosystem honorably and well. Get up. And so this kind of practice is what I've come to in times of craving, not just the writing, but also the coming back to the reading, as the kind of hand that helps lift onto that other path. So I want to share just an entry so that you guys can get the gist, and then perhaps write to yourself these words of encouragement in the path forward. To myself, I know you crave. You might not know what for, but you feel it, or you think it. Remember the truth of your existence and your non-existence. A living system of relationships, ever morphing and solidifying. Feed the relationships of wholesome living and cultivate joy in every step. This is for your agency. Take up the arms of responsibility and dance with that which is greater than you are now. Spiral upwards, my friend, like Kapwa. Every step makes you stronger. It is simply what must be done. Cultivate your gifts and give them. Become worthy of greater gifts. A good fellow. Come back to flow. Let breathe. Let think. Let churn. The next step ain't always easy, but it is the right, good, healthy step. What you do right now matters. Smile to the path of strength and freedom and bow away from the path of ill-being. Remember the cost of life, the suffering of food. Honor them by living out their best qualities and transmuting their worst. Let your sacred gratitude grow the flame into fire and consume and create with fullness of mind and the force of a graceful dancer. Surf the waves. You cannot stop them. So I'll give you guys some time to write some words of encouragement for each other and for yourselves. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. And then we'll use our dopamine system for what it was meant for, which is the turning into reality. We will lean into discomfort and march into the water. And if you're willing to join me. So I'll give you guys some time in silence. Just write some words of encouragement to yourself. If you want to keep writing, but I'll take questions if you guys have any.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does imagination create dopamine?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was saying how the pathway to the frontal cortex, like the perception. If I were to talk about how much I love Albany Bold and the color blue of the sky, like just thinking about how you enjoy things greatly increases the amount of dopamine you can get from the thing. And actually, that's a good point. I forgot to touch on this. Is that the stacking of, I guess, stimulus, dopaminergic stimulus on top of each other. If you're trying to pursue, let's say you're trying to work out, right? And you have your favorite cup of coffee, and you're listening to your favorite music, and you're texting friends, thinking that you're doing that so that you can be more motivated to work out. You're actually undermining the process, and it'll make it harder to experience motivation to work out, but you'll experience more motivation to do those other things. And not only more motivation to do those other things, but you'll need all those things in place to be able to work out. Because if you have to imagine the purpose that the system is meant for, it works best when we find intrinsic pleasure in the things that we're doing. And that's ultimately the best way to pursue something sustainably, is to learn to get intrinsic reward from the process of it, rather than trying to extrinsically or externally reward yourself with something at the end. So if you want to work out and make that like a thing, learn to really enjoy the process, the struggle of working out itself, without needing to have your favorite music and coffee and all that stuff.
Is that because it increases that variability? Because you're at the coffee and the music pumping, you're creating that big bear crash. You're affecting that baseline.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's all about like learning what's rewarding. And so if that's what's rewarding, then you're gonna need all those things in place.
Yeah. So working out without like coffee and music is just like, man, once you've been doing that, it's like setting a higher bar.
Exactly. And that's also why kind of just constantly doing like really fun stuff every day, like work hard, play hard all the time. That's why people burn out after a couple of years of doing that. It's because even though it seems like you're doing different things, there's only one currency for motivation, that's dopamine. So if you're depleting that all the time and not giving yourself time to just be bored, be a little uncomfortable, then you'll burn out.
I think there's, sorry.
Go ahead.
What do you think would be the most efficient way to lower your dopamine base?
To heighten it.
Yeah. Would be to like go a certain amount of days without taking in certain pleasures, or would be more effective to put yourself against stress?
I think both, because one thing is that you gotta like stop hijacking first of all. So like that means abstaining for at least, I'd say, like in my experience, like a couple weeks. But if you really do a month, then it'll give your system enough time to really rejuvenate. But then cold water, like cold immersion, if you look at the charts of what spikes dopamine, cocaine spikes dopamine 2.5 times above the baseline level. And it rides out, but then it crashes super hard. Cold water raises dopamine 2.5 times, the same as cocaine, but instead of crashing super hard, it rides out for like a couple hours before fading down back to baseline. So it's almost this gift from Mother Nature to be like, hey, you like went and like faced discomfort and you like joined the elements. Like, here's some good dopamine. So cold water along with like sobriety, I guess.
You good?
Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, I just want to thank you guys again for your time and attention. And if you do want to like support me in doing this more, you can donate like later. But let's get in the cold.
Yeah.
Thank you.